What day is it, Mark?
Oh, good question. I was going to go on the Google machine, but I think it's Friday.
It's Friday. You know what that means, Mark?
Rapid Fire Friday.
Boom, boom, boom. Rapid Fire Friday.
Rapid Fire Friday. Here are two questions for the podcast. I do not consent the use of my name, profile, or likeness on the podcast. Well,
Thanks for that clarity.
Is understood.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
So I'll just start with the
Question number one, yes.
Question number one. Can you expound on Sovereign Grace's church planning activity and progress on each continent?
Yeah, sad to say, we don't have much progress in Antarctica.
You and anybody else.
Yeah, right.
Less than anybody else.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. But yeah, I appreciate this question because one of the things that I love about Sovereign Grace is that Sovereign Grace is, while it was started in the United States, it's not a movement that's American. In God's sovereignty, we were started here, but we have partners all across the globe. And so in North America, there are about 80 churches in the United States, give or take. In Mexico, there's another 19.
Wow. And
so that's significant. And so a lot of what happens, a lot of the funding, a lot of the genesis from who we are starts in the United States. But Mexico, where I'm familiar with, they're regularly planting churches, and churches are also asking to be adopted into Sovereign Grace. And so right now there are 19 churches that have either been planted or are established or are requesting adoption into Sovereign Grace in Mexico. Now, when you move down to South America and to Central America, there's about 10 to 15 churches that we're interacting with and relating to in countries like Bolivia, Colombia, Venezuela, Costa Rica, Brazil. That's just to name a few. And so right now we're planting a church in Colombia. Now, the gentleman who's planting the church is Colombian. Mm. He speaks Spanish. He knows the culture. So what we're not doing is taking white Americans and parachuting them down into all the places around the world to do this work.
So it's not accept our cultural norms and our way of doing things.
So what we want to do is train and raise up locals to do that work in their context and environment. And so even as we speak, a church plant is happening right now in Colombia. And so Venezuela, that's a closed country. And so we're interacting with people who are leading church plants there. I mean, we've got folks we're serving in Cuba. We've got all across the Spanish world, we have people that are interacting with us, and, we're talking to them to try to determine, are you a fit to be in Sovereign Grace? Do we believe the same kinds of things? That kind of thing. And so it's wonderful just to see the Lord move through just all these kind of contexts. And so there's probably, I'd guess, about 12 to 15 churches that are officially related to us, another 25 or 30 more that want to relate to us in South and Central America. In Asia, there are a whole bunch of churches, and the primary country there is the Philippines. And so there's over 20 churches there in the Philippines.
I saw that on the website. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's amazing. Over 20 churches there. But we also have things happening in Pakistan, in India, in China. And all of this is more frontier kind of work.
Yeah.
And so that kind of frontier work is a little bit slower. It takes time. Again, we're trying to raise up folks from that area, right?
Yeah.
One of the countries that we're interacting with is there are pastors in Pakistan who we look to serve. I mean, it's a closed country. We can't get there. But there's ways in which I won't talk about here, just to protect those men and their identities.
Right.
That we serve.
Dangerous place to plant.
It is. And they're leading churches right now. And so there's Nepal, which we've had a lot of interaction with. And so I would guess in Asia, we're looking at something like 30 plus churches that are official, and then another 30 to 40 that are interested in participating in Sovereign Grace at some level. Europe is different. I mean, Europe is kind of a post-Christian. It is a post-Christian area, and so it's a lot harder work. It's a lot harder sledding there. And we've got probably about 8 to 10 churches that are either established or looking to be planted. We've planted a church in Italy recently.
I remember that.
Yeah, and we've got a couple churches in the UK. We have other churches that are relating to us other places. We have one in Germany that we're on friendly terms with, and so different ones. We have churches that we're relating to in the Ukraine, in that war area. In fact, in our staff meeting, we pray for a church in the Ukraine every week, and we're interacting with the pastor there. And so Europe is about, I would say, like 8 official churches, another 8 or 10 that want to participate as well. Australia is,
that's the continent. I forgot.
yeah, it is. It's kind of its own thing, but it's
island.
a continent. Yeah. We have a real significant church in Sydney, Australia. They've planted another church in a neighboring town called Parramatta. So we have 2 official churches in Australia and more they're looking to plant more, and there's other churches that are interested in adoption in that part of the world. But Dave Taylor, who leads the church in Sydney, is he interacts all throughout Asia, and he travels all throughout the Asia Pacific region looking to sort of equip and train and evaluate pastors who can go and plant churches and spread the gospel. And lastly, Africa, we have
where the prosperity gospel is.
That's everywhere, actually. Yeah. It's in Latin America, it's everywhere. But especially, we see that a lot in Africa.
Yeah.
And so we've got about 10 churches we're relating to in Africa, one in Liberia, one in Ethiopia, in the capital of Addis Ababa. We have Zambia.
What's that new country that we talked about?
Huh?
Frank was telling us about one planet.
Oh, Namibia.
Say that again.
Namibia. There's
I'm going to find that on
going on there. Yeah. And so there's probably, I'd say, about 10 churches that we're interacting with throughout the continent. There are, like, in a very short amount of time, we're going to have more churches outside the U.S. than inside the U.S. I mean, we're getting real close, official churches. So that's some of the activity, and that's kind of how it's going on the continent as we speak.
So as a denomination, we're learning about the different challenges in different cultures and on different continents, and how we can best equip the people on the ground for ministry in their local area.
Absolutely. We're not just learning about it, and we're learning about it from them. Because
right.
They're there. They know the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there are places that we should go because there is no gospel present. There is no faithful gospel presence, right?
Yeah.
And you have to send somebody in who doesn't know often the language or the culture. But we're sending people we're trying to support people who know the language and the culture because that's where they're from, right?
Right.
They can tell us all about what's going on in Brazil because they're Brazilian. They can tell us all about what's going on in Pakistan because they're Pakistani.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's part of how we're trying to do this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for answering that. This question's on bitterness and forgiveness.
Yes.
And it's got 4 parts to it. I can just read all 4 and you can kind of tackle them how you want. What is the place of negative emotion in a Christian's life? What is a Christian supposed to do with feelings of bitterness? Can trauma ever stop producing bitterness that has to constantly be maintained away? Can forgiveness and bitterness coexist, or are they mutually exclusive?
Yeah, I'll try to tackle all of those things.
All on the same kind of topic.
They're all on the same continuum. About negative emotion, like sadness, anger, disappointment, grief. The place of negative emotion like that is just part of life for the Christian, right? And so, like, we're not sealed in some hermetically sealed compartment where we're protected from the hardship and trial and trauma of life. And so we wouldn't be human if we didn't face these things without sadness, anger, disappointment, grief, without wondering why, without struggling and thrashing about sometimes all by ourselves. And so they're a part of our life because we live in a fallen world. And so I would say that this is significant. I mean, if you think about the fact that there are of the 150 Psalms, there are over 60 that have some sort of lament in them. And by lament, It means something where the psalmist cries out, Lord, how long? Or do you see? Are you aware what's going on? Why are you so far away? Like those kinds of things. I mean, so the psalmists give voice to these negative emotions and they give voice to the Lord. And so it's one thing I want Christians to understand is that the process of like when we start to process some of these negative emotions or some significant trauma from the past, we don't just have to think the Christian response is just to push it down and pretend like it's not real or pretend like I'm strong enough to rise above and not worry about it. No, we need to process those things with the Lord. And it's entirely appropriate for us to take the lead of the psalmist and just stop and just give voice to our disappointments. I mean, like Psalm 13 from David says, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long? And so like that's appropriate. And so we as Christians are not subhuman where we need to pretend like these things don't hurt or aren't painful, right? And that's why I think it's helpful to read the Psalms. And it's also, like obviously we're called to forgive, but it's not wrong to express to the Lord your disappointment and your just how bad it hurts when someone sins against you, and just cry out to the Lord for help. And so, I mean, that's just true. And so when it comes to bitterness, though, bitterness and negative feelings are two different things. And so I would say bitterness is not technically a feeling, but a sin. And what bitterness is when we allow anger, sadness, or trauma to fester in our hearts and in our souls into some kind of septic environment. And that's where bitterness and angst. I mean, like bitterness is one of those things. If you've ever experienced bitterness, it's easier to understand what bitterness is by experiencing it than trying to describe it. I can define what it is, but it's feelings of like perpetual, like towards someone, hard feelings towards someone where you rejoice when something bad happens to them or you wish something bad would happen to them. And so a Christian, who's gone through significant trauma or grief, they have no right to be bitter, but there's going to be a challenge to be bitter, right? You have to fight it off. Now, I don't consider myself someone who's experienced significant trauma, but I have been sinned against, and it's hard to let those feelings go. And so the only way I've been able to find relief is to get help as I talk to other Christians who are more mature than me, and just express those feelings to the Lord every time I feel them and ask him for help.
Yeah.
Even as I forgive the person who's wronged me, I know that I'm probably going to have to forgive him again, maybe in 3 minutes, because it's going to come back to my mind. Right. And so instead, for what I've tried to do is when it comes to taking thoughts captive, is I try not to rehearse the wrongs that they have done against me or have fake conversations in my head where I wish I'd have said this when they said this, or if I only said that, everything would be different. I try not to go down those roads, which is really hard.
Yeah.
And I have to try to say, Lord, what so-and-so did, what so-and-so said, what so-and-so's continuing to do or say, that was wrong. It hurts. I hate it. And I want it to go away.
Right.
Lord, help me not to be bitter, and I forgive them for what they've done. And you know what? It's not one and done. You don't just snap your fingers and say, well, I've said the magic words and the bad feelings go. It is, it's something that we have to fight. And you know what? We have to fight and to forgive people we oftentimes have to forgive people whether they ask us or not.
Yeah.
And sometimes the people who've wronged us most significantly are dead, and there's nothing we can do with that right now. And so we might have to offer forgiveness to that person to fend off bitterness dozens and dozens and dozens of times an hour.
Yeah. So just this person offered their opinion as a slight follow-up.
Yeah. I mean, and like these are real experiences. And I'm not just talking about millennial manufactured trauma. I'm talking about real trauma, right? Trauma where you need real help. Talk to somebody, process these feelings. Don't push them down. You need someone to help you walk and process these things through. And so that like in some ways, if you've really been wronged, you need to talk to people about that, and say, hey, this person did this to me and they told me it was right. Was that right? No, they need to hear that it was wrong, right? And
Yeah.
have that kind of validation. And so, like bitterness, like fighting bitterness is not as easy as just extending forgiveness. Oftentimes, if you've really been wronged at a fundamental level, we have to just fight that grief by giving voice to it and getting help thinking it through, and just thinking about, like, okay, here's what happened. That was wrong. Lord, help me to forgive this person. Because ultimately we forgive because we've been forgiven.
Amen.
The Lord's forgiven us of our many sins, and he wasn't bitter against us, even though our sin caused his death. And so I think that's partly how we fight bitterness.
Yeah.
We fight it by forgiveness, but it's not a simple process, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Just to plug, if you're more interested in forgiveness, we did a full episode on this, number 56. So feel free to check that out. And thank you for answering that question. But there's one more little piece. I'm going to give the opinion that this anonymous question asker gave. And they said, I don't think bitterness from trauma is 100% bad if it can be used as the sounding board that drives us to godliness. I do believe bitterness and forgiveness can coexist. How does one participate in God's healing if there wasn't a wound to heal? Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I would probably, if I was sitting and talking to this person, I would say, hey, let's define our terms, right?
Yeah.
I would substitute the term bitterness for grief or sorrow,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Because like bitterness is different. Bitterness and sorrow and grief are different. But if I substitute the word grief for bitter, yeah, I think absolutely forgiveness and grief go side by side. Absolutely. And so that's where I just would, if I'm talking to this person, I would want to like maybe tease that out a little bit.
Well, they're anonymous, so you're not going to be doing that.
Exactly.
But thank you for answering that one.
Thanks for the question.
And that's all the questions I have for now.
For now, but there will be another Friday that comes, because you know what, Mark? They come once every 7 days.
Every 7.
Every 7. And so
wow.
Rapid Fire Friday, we'll be back.
All right. Well, I'm going to hold you to that.
All right, sounds good.
Take care, guys.